Imagine being a respected judge driving through your own neighborhood only to be pulled over by a cop who instantly assumes you've stolen your own car. What would you do if, despite your authority and accomplishments, you were treated like a criminal simply because of your race? And when the truth finally comes out, how do you think the officer will react when they realize who you truly are? This shocking story will make you question, how often does this happen? And what does it take for justice to truly prevail? Before we begin this heartfelt story, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Isaiah Carr brushed a speck of dust off the dashboard of his brand new Lexus. It was only a week old, but he already treated it like a prized possession. The leather seats had barely lost their factory shine, and the smooth purr of the engine gave him a sense of satisfaction that felt almost tangible. He'd just come from his office at the courthouse. A long day behind him filled with back-to-back hearings, paperwork, and the weight of other people's problems. But this drive down the wide, tree-lined streets of Winterdale, Michigan, was his favorite part of the day. It allowed him a moment to decompress, to feel in control again. The calm streets, with their grand, sprawling homes set back from the road, were a sharp contrast to the tension that often followed him at work. But the momentary peace in his mind didn't last long. Just as Isaiah started humming along with the smooth rhythm of the jazz on the radio, flashing blue and red lights pierced the evening calm. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the unmistakable sight of a police cruiser tailing him. His heart skipped a beat, and his fingers instinctively tightened around the steering wheel. He pulled over without hesitation, confused but compliant. The neighborhood was quiet, far from the chaos of city life, and Isaiah hadn't been speeding. He knew that much. In fact, he'd been driving under the limit, enjoying the leisurely drive home after a long week. So what could he have possibly done wrong? A sharp rap on the window cut through his thoughts. He turned to find a tall, broad-shouldered officer peering down at him, her face unreadable, her hand resting conspicuously close to the gun holstered at her side. "License and registration," she barked without the courtesy of a greeting. Isaiah complied silently, reaching into the glove compartment to retrieve his documents. The officer, her nameplate reading Officer Rhodes, snatched the papers from his hands without so much as a glance in his direction. She scanned the papers, her eyes narrowing as they darted back and forth between the documents and Isaiah himself. "Step out of the car," she ordered. Isaiah blinked. "Excuse me?" "Out. Now," she repeated, her voice harder this time, leaving no room for argument. Isaiah hesitated for a moment, his mind racing to comprehend what was happening. He was a judge, a respected one at that. In fact, he had presided over cases that likely involved Officer Rhodes' own department. He was on familiar ground in Winterdale, a place where he knew people, where he was known, and yet here he was, being treated like a suspect. "Ma'am, there must be some misunderstanding," he said, keeping his tone measured. "I'm Judge Isaiah Carr. This is my car, and I live just down the street." Officer Rhodes raised an eyebrow, her hand shifting ever so slightly toward her gun. "Step out. Now." Swallowing the rising wave of indignation, Isaiah complied. He wasn't going to make things worse, not here, not now. He opened the door and stepped out, standing beside his car as Officer Rhodes eyed him with a look that sent a chill down his spine. She walked around him slowly, as if sizing him up. "I've had reports of a vehicle like this stolen last week," she said, her eyes fixed on him as though he'd confessed to the crime himself. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "This is my car. I purchased it from the dealership a few days ago. If you run the plates, it will come back clean." She didn't seem to hear him, or maybe she didn't care. "Hands on the hood," she snapped, stepping toward him. "This is unnecessary," Isaiah protested, his patience fraying at the edges. "I've done nothing wrong." Officer Rhodes' eyes glinted with something he couldn't quite place. Was it suspicion or something more sinister? "You're going to do as I say, or we'll have a problem," she said, her voice hard and unyielding. Isaiah's blood ran hot, but he reminded himself to stay calm. He wasn't just anyone. He knew how to handle situations like this. He knew his rights, and he knew the law. Yet despite everything he'd worked for, everything he'd achieved, It felt as though none of that mattered right now. With a deep breath, Isaiah complied, placing his hands on the hood of the car. He felt the eyes of the nearby residents on him. Curtains twitching as neighbors peeked out to watch the spectacle unfolding in front of them. The humiliation stung more than anything else. He had worked his entire life to rise above moments like these, to prove himself, to be respected. But here he was, being reduced to a common suspect in front of the people he lived among. Officer Rhodes began patting him down roughly, her movements brusque and devoid of any respect. "We've had reports of car thieves in the area," she said. "This vehicle matches the description of one stolen last week." Isaiah clenched his jaw. "I already told you. This car was purchased a few days ago. If you'll allow me to explain—" "Save it for the station," she interrupted, reaching for her handcuffs. Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to speak calmly. "Clearly, Officer Rhodes, I suggest you call your superior before you make a decision you'll regret." Her hand hovered above the cuffs. "You expect me to believe that?" Isaiah looked her in the eye, unwavering. "I expect you to verify my identity and do your job properly." Something shifted in her expression, just a flicker of uncertainty. Her confidence wavered, and she took a step back. With a huff of frustration, she reached for her radio and muttered into it, keeping her gaze locked on Isaiah. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Isaiah stood there, hands still on the car, while Officer Rhodes kept glancing between him and her radio, waiting for confirmation. The air between them crackled with tension, and Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Neighbors still peeking from behind their curtains, witnessing his humiliation. Finally, the radio crackled to life, and a voice came through on the other end. "Rhodes, stand down immediately. Judge Carr is a respected member of the community. I'm on my way." Isaiah straightened, feeling a surge of relief, but the damage had already been done. His dignity had been tarnished, and no amount of apologies could erase the humiliation he'd endured. Officer Rhodes' face flushed with embarrassment as she lowered her radio. She hesitated for a moment, then muttered, "I'm sorry, Your Honor. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Isaiah adjusted his jacket. His composure regained, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. "A misunderstanding," he echoed, his voice calm but firm. "That's what we're calling racial profiling now, officer." Before she could respond, another police car pulled up, and a tall man with graying hair stepped out. Captain Reynolds, head of the local precinct, approached with an air of urgency. "Judge Carr," he called out as he approached, his expression grave. "I can't begin to apologize enough for this incident. Rest assured, we'll get to the bottom of it." Isaiah nodded, but his mind was already racing with the implications of what had just happened. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the countless others who had been wrongly accused, harassed, or profiled. And now, as he stood there with Captain Reynolds offering his apologies, Isaiah made a decision that,